Marianne. First of all, just to thank the Mayor and Hall for affording us the opportunity to be here in Mansion House today, and to thank PANA and the People's Movement for allowing me to speak. So I'm going to start with a quotation that says, "Integration into permanent European structured military cooperation, or PESCO, involves a binding commitment to increased military spending." And that statement was made by a pro-European militarisation advocate and opponent of Irish unity, of Irish neutrality rather, Ben Tonra, Professor of International Relations at UCD, and he said that on RTE some time ago. He's also the project leader of the Irish Institute for International and European Affairs Policy Group on European Security and Defence. And this body has recently advocated ending neutrality in an opinion piece by its then President Brendan Halligan in the Irish Times. And he said the following, he said, "Post-Brexit support from Berlin and Paris will come at a cost. As the Franco-German axis reasserts itself, Irish neutrality and corporation tax policies will have to be revisited." So that sets the scene for where the PESCO is going to. So current military spending in Ireland is just shy of the 1 billion mark. But PESCO involves alignment with NATO, and there is a number of countries who participate in PESCO who are also members of NATO. And the NATO requirement for military spending in member states is 2% of gross domestic product. In Ireland, and I know someone has raised a query earlier this morning as to what is gross domestic product in Ireland. It's been confused in that, but if we take the official situation at the moment, which is something in the region of 400 billion euros. Now 2% of that is 8 billion euros. So the objective is to increase military spending to something in the region of 8 billion euros per year. But even if the cost of PESCO involvement doesn't ultimately reach that figure, it is absolutely clear from all the correspondence, all the data that's available, it's absolutely clear that there will be a significant and substantial increase in military expenditure over the next number of years. And that leads to the fiscal treaty. And under that treaty, there are severe restrictions on borrowing and on the size and the nature of budget deficits which any country can run. So this means that substantial increases in public spending must come from existing taxation, from increasing existing taxation, or indeed new taxation. And of course we can be absolutely certain that any new taxation or any increased taxation isn't going to come from the super rich. They have had a holiday for forever almost in this country, so we can be sure that ordinary working people and their families will bear the brunt of any new or increased taxation. And it means, of course, that military spending then will be done also at the expense of the provision of housing and health and education and welfare. And I think Thomas Pringle is going to deal with that in more detail, I think. So I leave that in. The facts are simple, that increased military spending will be at the expense of housing and health, education and general public services. And Dr. Mary C. Murphy of the Department of Politics and Governance at UCD, she said as much recently, and if you remember the Killarney Economic Conference where she spoke, and she said there may be an element of payback for Ireland in return for the support the state has received from other members of the EU 27. She was speaking, as I said, at the Killarney Economic Conference, which was chaired by Mark Hennessy of the Irish Times, and you remember as well that that conference was addressed by Arlene Foster of the DUP. So Dr. Murphy set out possible scenarios in which Ireland might be required to be giving in terms of neutrality or taxation in a debate on the future of Europe. And she said it may open up a lot of difficulties for Irish voters. So basically what she's saying is there may well be a play-off neutrality as against taxation and support from the other EU 27. And we can also be certain, as I said earlier, we can be certain that it will be at the expense of public service, but we can also be sure that any spending like that will come ahead of the restoration of cuts in allowances or indeed decent wages and conditions for defence forces personnel. And we've all seen recently where wives and partners of defence forces have been seeking such restoration, such decent pay. Very many of the defence forces, the soldiers at the moment, would be in receipt, for instance, of family income supplement. Someone raised earlier as well, what will be the direct effect of PESCO on workers and working class. And obviously soldiers are workers, and there's a direct effect there. And of course there's also the direct effect if spending is diverted from housing, as it will be, health and other services. That's again a direct effect. And of course there's the ultimate effect, and we've seen in two world wars where effectively working class people were used and slaughtered almost at will, and that's something that can't be ruled out in the future either. So the other thing that is happening currently is that additional military spending is already in the pipeline, is already happening. And you may have seen an article in the Irish Examiner in recent times where it said the government has purchased a huge ship from which helicopters can be launched, and the Navy considers buying a 200 million multi-role ship. So in the recent past, in line with this increased spending, the government has already spent about 250 million euros buying new replacements for existing Coast Guard vessels rather than refurbishing them. These vessels could have been refurbished at a fraction of the cost, but they've expended monies on replacing these ships. Again, as I said, in advance obviously of even making decent wages and conditions available to serving personnel. So there's a fourth ship for the fleet, and that is currently being built. It's the L.E. George Bernard Shaw. It's costing 67 million euros. It's currently being constructed in Devon and to be delivered this summer. So I raised a question with the Taoiseach and the Minister of Defence in relation to what is called a multi-role vessel, and this is in addition to the ones I've already mentioned. And I asked him what is the estimated additional cost if a decision had been made to put the provision of this vessel out to tender, and what the position was in relation to it. And I think it might be important just to give some of his reply. And he said, the white paper provides for the replacement of the current Navy service flagship L.E. Etna with a multi-role vessel, which will be enabled for helicopter operations and will also have freight carrying capacity. It is the government's intent that this new vessel will provide a flexible and adaptive capability for a wide range of maritime tasks, both at home and overseas. He said, planning has commenced on this project and is intended to hold a public tender competition in due course to cover the supply of the vessel. This, of course, is subject to the availability of funding within the overall defence capital funding envelope. The cost of this vessel will only be known after the tender competition has been completed. So the acquisition of the vessel will, and he says the acquisition of this vessel will ensure that the operational capabilities of the Naval Service as a state's principal seagoing agency are maintained to the greatest extent and taking account of the overall policy approach in the white paper on defence. So I suppose we should note in that reply the word overseas. And he says, again, it's the government's intent that this new vessel will provide a flexible and adaptive capability for a wide range of maritime tasks, both at home and overseas. He didn't answer the question in relation to the estimated cost, but he certainly didn't contradict the examiner's reference to 200 million euros. So this vessel, as I said, which will replace the Etna, has a length of about 80 metres. The new ship being purchased has almost double that length. It's 150 metres. It will be capable, he says, of carrying a battalion of soldiers and will carry landing craft to put them ashore from sea. And according again to the teacher, it will have a freight carrying capacity. This could include, obviously, military vehicles. So it's very clear that this ship is something different than the kind of ships that have been available in the past. It's not obviously simply for protection of our coastline or for fishing or for drug apprehension. This is obviously a ship which is going to be used overseas. So it's clear that the ship will be suitable to participate in naval expeditions with the navies of other European countries. And of course we're already participating in Operation Sophia in the Mediterranean, and this expedition is assisting currently. This expedition is assisting the return of refugees to detention camps in Libya. As merely referred to the fact that the number of refugees being rescued was declining. And of course, part of the reason for that, if not the full reason for that, is that the European ships are now effectively corralling refugees around the Libyan coast to be picked up by the Libyan Coast Guard, one of 3 different governments which are currently operating in Libya. And what is happening then is that these refugees are being returned effectively to detention camps in Libya. So people like Médecins Sans Frontières and the UN Commission on Human Rights and indeed even the Luxembourg Foreign Minister have already described those camps as detention centres. They say horrendous centres of violation of human rights outside the rule of law. So we're already in a situation, we're already in this situation, and this vessel that is now being purchased is obviously a vessel which will be used in that type of operation. And of course, we have to remember as well that very recently the new French President Macron said that a new military invasion of Libya should be considered. Now, will Irish troops be put ashore in Libya to die effectively for French interests? It's also well to remember that the recent atrocity, for instance, in Manchester, was carried out by Libyans reacting to the whole situation, there. So, I suppose there is, and I'll finish very shortly now, There's a wider context as well, I suppose, to these issues, and Dr. Murphy, who's concerned about the further dilution of Irish unity, rightly so, and Brendan Flanagan, who wants to end Irish neutrality. They have a common underlying assumption, really, and that assumption is that this 26 county government is weak, it's vulnerable to pressure from other foreign powers, and on fundamental issues, the 26 county state has very restricted, if any, political and economic sovereignty. And that's the assumption, I believe, is behind both of those contributions. In fact, I suppose, as we're here in the Mansion House, I suppose the last Irish Parliament, which had any strong sovereignty, didn't meet around the corner in Leinster House, but met just around the corner here in the next room to us, almost 100 years ago. It'll be 100 years in January of next year, 1st of 1919. So I think due to the lack of sovereignty, I think we have to ask ourselves the question is, could we end up in one set of conflicts due to the use of Shannon by military forces, US military forces, or in a different set of conflicts due to our participation in PESCO? Could our soldiers die in wars between big powers, or wars of conquest by big powers? That may seem remote, but when you look at the situation right throughout the Middle East, and particularly in places like Yemen, it may not be too remote at all, and it's something that we should certainly consider. James Connolly, I think, he was right in my view when he said an all-Ireland republic with full economic and political sovereignty is necessary to ensure that the interests of Irish people are put first by an Irish government. I believe PESCO is a game changer because it involves the direct involvement of the Irish state and its armed forces in foreign wars. That is what effectively we're signing up for. Direct involvement by the Irish state and by Irish armed forces in foreign wars. And I believe that we have to reverse that decision, and hopefully this conference is the start of a campaign to reverse that decision. And it would as well, in my view, be the first step towards restoring all Ireland sovereignty. So look, that's what I have to say. I'll take questions and try to answer them if you have any. Thank you.